Such a pleasure to have two excellent people here tonight, along with both your local Christchurch MPs and also Ginny Anderson. You've got Tracy McClellan here, we've got Reuben Davidson, I'm Duncan Webb if you didn't know, Megan Woods. Where's Ginny? Ginny's down the back there. Good to see you, Ginny. Good to see that you are actually here. And also, of course, we've got Barbara Edmonds, our finance spokesperson, and also Craig Renney, who is here as an economist, but just so happens to also work for the CTU, but to many of you he'll be well known as a commentator on economic policies. Why don't we go then straight away to Craig Renney. He's a respected economist, former advisor for Wellington, currently the economist for the CTU, and a man who has views. And let's hear some of them.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. My name is Craig Renney, as advertised. I am the economist for the CTU and director of policy. It's very rarely I get called respected, so I'll take that. But I want to talk to you today about the budget. It's a Thursday night, so let's talk about fiscal policy. I know that's what you're all thinking. And as a consequence, I want to talk to you about this. During the last election campaign, you might have heard the phrase, "Let's get the country back on track." And then, 1 year in government, the National Party put out a document saying that under its management, it was focused on delivering real, tangible results to improve the lives of all New Zealanders. Do you feel back on track yet? Well, let's look at the numbers. So, in this budget, we have job seekers numbers. The Treasury makes a forecast of job seekers numbers. This is the numbers that we had forecast at the election, this blue line. You can see just a little under 200,000 people were forecast to be on job seekers. That's the first budget. See, it went up a little bit, 205,000. This is this budget. Across that forecast period, there are an extra 61,000 people cumulatively on job seekers. The government has a target to reduce the number of people on job seekers by 50,000. Inside 3 years, it will have increased the number of people on job seekers by 50,000. So that's just job seekers, right? What about wages? Because the budget forecasts wages. So this is the wage forecast at this budget. 71,000 rises gently to a little over 72,200. Okay? That was the last budget. Your real wages by the end of that forecast period have fallen by $928. That tax cut that you got in 2023 has just disappeared. So what about business investment? Because businesses were promised a big tax cut at this election, so this budget. We saw $6.7 billion promised for investment boost. The government really likes the word boost. Everything is now boost, but investment boost. Now, this is what it was at the last budget. That was the growth in business investment, a little over 14% across the forecast period. This is this budget. There's 20% less business investment, even after that giant tax cut. Why are businesses investing less? Because people are keeping their hands in their pockets because they're a little bit worried about their jobs. Why are they a little bit worried about their jobs? Because they're seeing cuts from government spending, cuts in government investment. People are a little bit worried about where the next job's coming from. If they keep their hands in their pockets, businesses don't invest. If they don't invest, they don't create new jobs. Everyone gets a little bit worried about where the next job's going, and we go round and round and round. So there are some, I'm an economist. I can professionally depress a room from 250 paces, right? But there are some things that are going up. So this is house prices. House prices grow on average, compound 6% a year across the forecast period. Good news, if you've got a house, not so great for wages. That's the same growth. Wages grow by half the rate of houses. We're going back to an economy where the fastest way to get rich is to own somebody else's home. Interest rate deductibility is now back tax-free. There's no capital gains tax. The fastest way to get rich in New Zealand is to buy somebody else's house. So that's average wage rises, but what about GDP? This is the thing that we were all told, the government was elected on to get the economy moving again. Yeah? So at this budget, That's GDP growth, from $280 billion to $305 billion. Now, this already accounts for inflation. So we've taken inflation out of these numbers, okay? This was the last budget, so the budget last year. You see how the economy was a little bit bigger last year. And this is what it was at the election.
Those are our books.
Those are our books. Right? The gap between that green line and that blue line is $38 billion. Right? That is $5,000 per household in the country of output that should exist and doesn't. That's why the government doesn't have any money, because it doesn't have the tax from all of that GDP. It doesn't have the tax from all of that GDP because the economy is not growing. Why is the economy not growing? Because people are a little bit scared about their jobs because the government keeps cutting things. And we go round and round and round. We are ignoring 250 years of economic history in this budget. But what about, that's just this GDP. What about long-term GDP? Yeah, because I'm really sad. I can go back in time to Ruth Richardson, right? And I can take you, that was GDP growth under Ruth Richardson at a little over 3%. Yeah? And that's next governments, the colours change. I'm going to let you guess who they are. So that's Sir Michael Cullen's budgets, Bill English's budgets, Grant Robertson's budgets. This is Nicola's budget according to the Treasury. And this is Nicola's budget according to the Reserve Bank. Outside of the GFC, this is the worst economic result since Ruth Richardson. We saw the steepest fall in GDP in 2024 since 1991. And we also saw the fastest fall in government expenditure or government investment since 1991. These two things might be related. I know Nicola doesn't like being called Ruth Richardson, but if the cap fits. So I'm not going to make this political, but you can have, let's call it blue team versus red team. Right? Blue team versus red team. GDP growth on average since 1996. The blue team, 2.1%. Right? So this is already accounted for inflation. So this is real growth. Red team, 3.4%. But apparently, they're the economic managers. So let's move away from GDP, right? And let's have a look at debt, because again, the government was elected because apparently the books were out of control. Can you remember? We were spending wildly. Debt was out of control. Unless we stopped spending, everything was going to fall over. So this is what debt was going to be at the election. Net core crown debt, this is the internationally comparable measure, rises to a little under 23%. If we were having this conversation in Australia, it would be 30%. If we were having this conversation in the UK, it would be 92%. If we're having this conversation in the US, it would be 95%. If we're having this conversation in Japan, it would be 150%. But apparently New Zealand has a debt problem. So this is what it was in December of last year. Because apparently under the last government, debt was out of control. We're just going to really destruction test that theory by lifting debt to 26% of GDP. And this is what it is at this budget. By the end of the forecast period, debt is still higher. So despite all the cuts, despite all the changes, despite all the lack of investment, all the stopping on things like ferries that we need, debt is still higher. Why is debt still higher? Because this is as a percentage of GDP. Because GDP isn't growing. Why is GDP not growing? Because the government isn't investing. Because the government isn't investing, people are a bit worried about their jobs, and we go round and round and round. So that's debt to GDP. What about CPI? Can you remember there was going to be a laser-like focus on the cost of living? Can you remember that phrase? So that laser-like focus on the cost of living. This is what inflation was forecast to fall to at the election. Yeah. This is what it was forecast to fall to at this budget. So where we are right now, it's about the same. But hang on a second, the Reserve Bank is responsible for doing the proper forecasts for inflation, and that's its forecast for inflation. Right now, that light blue line is above the dark blue line. Inflation is higher than forecast right now at the election when inflation was out of control. So inflation's higher than forecast at the budget. Debt is higher than forecast at the election. Unemployment is higher than forecast at the election. The economy is smaller than forecast at the election. If someone can tell me what's going well, please can they tell me? Because I don't know. Do you feel back on track yet? So That was forecast GDP. So those are the kind of the big headline numbers of the economy. Yeah, that's where we are, right? Now, let's build a budget together. Yeah, so this is how we build a budget. It's just simply money in and money out, right? You know, economists wear suits to sort of make it look more flash than it really is. It's just simple money in, money out, right? So this is how we fund it. What the Treasury calls other savings initiatives, that's cuts to you and me, right? $2.1 billion a year, $8.4 billion of cuts over the next 4 years, on top of the $23 billion of cuts of the last budget. So $600 million of new tax for this budget, and then pay equity provides $2.7 billion a year in new funding. On top of the budget allowance, you end up with $6.7 billion of new spending, new money at this budget. And then they spend it. They give away immediately $1.7 billion in tax changes. That's the investment boost program, and it's stopping the digital services taxes on Facebook, on Google, $500 million lost that otherwise they would have been paying. So that's a tax cut straight to Facebook, who really needs a tax cut right now. And then they spend $5 billion. Now, some of that money is already pre-programmed, goes to health. The biggest winner outside health is defense. Defense, corrections, police. The money from pay equity is buying anti-tank missiles. Right? I don't know who's invading us or who we're invading, right? We could just pretend there were anti-tank missiles in a room and it would have the same effect, right? But that's where your money's going. Money in, money out. And so what about, that's just day-to-day spending, right? What about capital spending? Stuff on the, physical stuff, schools, hospitals, roads. We have a $210 billion infrastructure gap in this country, right? Those are bits of public kit, schools, hospitals, roads, sorts of things that should exist and don't, because we haven't paid for them, right? Now this was capital investment at the last budget of the last Labour government. $67 billion over the next 5 years. We do capital investment over 5 years. Don't ask me why, we just did. This is budget 24. It fell to 57. Can anyone guess where it falls to in this budget? $50.5 billion. We're spending less and less on the physical infrastructure of this country, on the stuff we really need. There are no state houses in that capital spend program at all. There's definitely no ferries in that capital bills program. We're spending less money on the public realm, and we're hoping the private sector is going to come along and save us in that space. Now, let's talk about cuts, because came by that $8.4 billion of cuts that was programmed, right? So if you work in agriculture, biosecurity, fisheries, food safety, arts, culture, heritage, building and construction, courts, customs, environment, Maori development, Pacific peoples, social development, or sports and recreation, there are only cuts. There are only cuts in this budget to those departments. And that's where your money's coming from. And let's talk about business support, because the economy is not going, right? GDP is not going. So you would think now's the time to invest in businesses, R&D, innovation, lift what's happening. Yeah? So this is investment in business support at this budget. $510 million, $500 million of business investment. Good. It's good spending, right? We should be doing that right now. But the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed international film subsidies is the next line. How much of that $510 billion is international film subsidies? 571. So net investment is minus 70. It's because we closed Callahan. It's because we're shutting down R&D investment and innovation. We're actually making the economy stupider. The party of business, remember that. Do you feel back on track yet? So that's business support, but what about health funding? Something we can all get behind, right? So health funding, health needed $2 billion just to stand still, just to keep the lights on, right? According to the Senior Medical Doctors Union, ASMS, and CTU calculations, i.e. me. And so it received $1.37 billion in cost funding and $1.7 billion in total. So it's $500 million a year behind where it needs to be just to keep the lights on. And there were new programs that were announced that received absolutely no money at all. Can you remember that $50 million for private sector firms to do the elective surgeries? That has to come out of that budget. So it acts just like a cut. Right? The new digital telehealth service, new GPs, has to come out of the same money. So it acts just like a cut in that service. And if you look at where the funding change is on a per capita basis, because I'm an economist, I can always make things worse. So we can draw some nice charts. So this is the amounts of money I would need on a per person basis to keep health in line with inflation since the last election. Yeah? This is where it is. It's $50. You are all getting $50 less healthcare than you were at the last election in real terms. And over those 2 years, you've lost $230 per person of healthcare as a consequence of them promising not to cut, but in real terms, it's been cut. And these aren't my numbers, these are Treasury's numbers. So what about education funding? Because there was lots announced. Erica Stanford was, everywhere telling everyone about big education spending. So education received a 1.5% increase in schools operation grants. Inflation is currently 2.6%. You don't need to be a professor of economics to know that's a real terms cut. Learning support received $395 million. Now, for the benefit of the tape, learning support, which sometimes is called special needs, is amongst the best spending that we can do in education. We absolutely should be doing it. Yeah? But that spending is paid for by cutting Kahuako, Māori, and Pacifica education programs, which collectively lost $454 million. It's not new money, it's just money moved around. There's no new money provided for teacher number growth. The same number of teachers in Budget 24 are the same number of teachers in Budget 25. And all of the Māori education package, $36 million over 4 years, is met by reprioritizing the existing Māori education package, particularly Te Reo education. Now, I'm not a Waitangi Tribunal expert, as this face will give away. But that is a contemporary Waitangi Tribunal claim waiting to happen. Because we have a responsibility to look after Te Reo in this country, and we're actually cutting the funding for it. Now, the good news is the biggest discretionary fund was $139 million for attendance services. So keeping kids in school. $80% of that $139 million is just to build the IT program for the attendance service. So, while you're all in a good mood, let's look at welfare changes. Best Start, which is a payment which is good to all children for the first year and is means tested for the second and third year. They're going to means test it for the first year. If you have two parents who are both on the minimum wage full-time, they can't get Best Start anymore. 55,000 children lose Best Start. Bearing in mind, we have about 65,000 live births a year. 18 and 19-year-olds will now be financially supported by their parents because we're going to take away job seekers. Around $600 million in welfare savings are achieved by data matching and IT. And if you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. All right? Working for families changes, we're lifting the income threshold to $44,900, right? What does that mean? If you're on a full-time minimum wage, you aren't going to get the full working for families. And we're lifting the abatement rate, so every dollar that you earn after that, you pay more back, right? There will be thousands of children worse off. And overall, there's about 142,000 families who will be about $7 a week better off. Now, for the majority of those families, that doesn't even cover the cost of living. And I was going to say, now I live in a fancy part of town in Wellington, right? But blocks of butter in my supermarket are more than $7, right? And they're not even getting that. So what happens? We are missing every single one of our child poverty targets, even the weakened targets that they then set for themselves. There are 156,900 children in New Zealand who live in material poverty. That means they don't have 2 pairs of shoes. They don't have a winter coat. They live in cold, moldy housing. Do you know how we measure mold in housing? Right? We say, is the patch of mold larger than the size of A4? That number of children who live in material poverty is going up. In a country as wealthy as New Zealand, that's a sin. And there's nothing in any of these numbers that's going to make that any better. So, there are a bunch of other strange decisions in this budget, and I put them in as light relief, right? So we're spending $29 million on new ministerial services and ministerial travel budgets. Sorry, Adam. That's more than all of the money being made available to help elderly people with care needs move out of hospital. So ministers can go on international junkets, but we can't get elderly people out of hospital to lead lives of dignity and respect. The proposed rates relief package, if any of you have a gold card and you get the money off rates relief, $790, that's the most you can get. It's going to rise to $805, $15 a year, or 29 cents a week. A laser-like focus on the cost of living. Please don't spend it all in one shop. And we're spending $31.2 million on new military-style academies, or boot camps, because the first program went so well. We had 10 people, one of them absconded, and 9 of them reoffended. But we're really going to destruction test it by putting $30 million in. $15 million supports private schools, but ACE centres have to make do with a 2% real terms cut in their funding. There's a 6% increase in tuition fees for students, on top of a 6% increase for student tuition fees last year. And the payment threshold for student loan repayments remains stable forever. And if you rent, you put your tenancy bond in with the tenancy bond service. The government gets interest on the money that you put that tenancy bond in for. We've made more money on the interest because interest rates have been higher than we thought. That's $180 million. You would have thought, great, we can spend that on homelessness services or on tenancy services or on housing inspection. We've gone, thank you very much, that belongs to me now. The Crown thanks you for your contribution in these difficult times. And in these difficult times, let's look at KiwiSaver. So contributions at a rise to 4%, and KiwiSaver tax contributions at a half. So you probably got $520, you're now going to get $260. Yeah, used to be $1,000. And $3 billion is how much that saves the Crown from that decision. A minimum wage worker, if they started at 18, if they went to 65, with the loss of that tax contribution and compound interest, they lose $81,600 by the time they're 65 from that decision, from their KiwiSaver. Albert Einstein famously said that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't gravity, it was compound interest. That loss of income, tall, handsome, white economists like me, we'll be okay, right? But low-income workers, that's so much a larger proportion of their KiwiSaver. This is such a regressive thing to do. And look at the bottom, the Treasury has a nice little thing. I'm not going to test your eyesight by saying that, but we have assumed that employers will offset the majority, 80%, of their higher contributions via lower than otherwise wage increases. So you're going to have to pay more money. The employer isn't going to pay its side. It's going to force you to pay its side, and the Crown's better off. Do you feel back on track yet? Then there are these pay equity changes. Dismal signs. I'm an economist, professionally depress a room. $12.8 billion of funding is essentially, and I'm advised to use that word for legal reasons, stolen from low-income, female-dominated workforces. It's been taken solely to make the government's accounts look better. Because the numbers never worked for their tax plan in 2023, despite the fact that we told them over and over again that the numbers never worked. This is political cowardice of the first order. Instead of saying, do you know what, we messed up, we're going to fix it, they've stolen that money from low-income female workers. Working women in particular are going to pay the price for their inability to count. I've lived in New Zealand for 13 years. This is the worst piece of lawmaking I have seen in this country in 13 years. But that's, of course, if we ignore the other employment law changes, removing fair pay agreements, contracting reform, proposed sick leave changes, removing protections for living wage in government contracts, cutting the minimum wage in real terms for 2 years in a row, bringing back 90-day trials, pay deductions for partial strikes, removing access to personal grievances, and health and safety reforms. They've done that in the first 500 days. So what's the message of this budget? What's it telling us? Basically, the government doesn't understand the problems facing New Zealanders. Parents will apparently welcome financially looking after their 18 and 19-year-olds. That was the exact words of the Minister of Finance. She said, I think parents will welcome the opportunity to look after their 18 and 19-year-olds, get them off the couch, get them off the PlayStation, and get them into a job. Taking away government KiwiSaver contributions is apparently, according to the press release, an opportunity to save more for low-income workers. And my own personal favourite, the name of the press release that sets out cuts to Best Start payments to 60,000 babies is called Increased Support for Families. We are through the looking glass. So, quick recap. Who are the winners of this budget? Big capital-intensive businesses. They get nice write-offs. Social media companies. They don't have to pay tax. Car dealers. Because that big social write-off will now be able to be used for double cab utes. And the Ford Raptor package is going to get the treatment. Film studios. International film studios, because there's no money for domestic film studios. Private medical firms. Technology firms who will be selling that IT to MSD to try and chase that money that's never going to turn up. And who loses? Now think about, why would you set up a government? Who are you going to look after when you set up a government? Would it be families, female workforces, children, Māori and Pacifica, workers, public services, or the environment? There's not a cent in this budget for climate change. There's not a cent for the environment, and there are only cuts to conservation. So if you take nothing else away from today, because I've talked at you a lot, forgive me, and I've depressed you a lot, I can tell. If I take nothing else away from today, please just take this. Everything that we do in the budget is a choice. There's nothing natural in a budget. Everything in the budget, the Treasury forces you to make decisions about. There's a great quote from the former US President Joe Biden. He said, don't tell me your values. Show me your budget and I'll tell you your values. This is a government that's telling us its values via its budget. Who is it supporting? It's none of these people, it's these people. These people are all suffering because of these choices that are being made. And so can I leave you with one last number? I'm a big fan of numbers, obviously. Can I leave you with one last number? And it's a really important number to me. There are 508 days to the next election. My guess, 1st of November, 2026. We can't waste a single day pointing out the damage that this budget, the previous budget, and this government's actions are delivering to the communities, to your families, to the places you live, to your workforces. Because 508 days sounds like a lot, but it will go. It will disappear. And we have to start today pointing out to everyone the damage that this is doing and what we can do, and that we can make a better choice. Thank you all very much for listening.
I'm not sure if that was politics of fear or hope, but it just feels like but look, I actually forgot to do something earlier on, but this is the politics of hope. I forgot to introduce 3 young people who are here tonight. Members of Parliament get to choose young people to be their youth MPs and just have a bit of a taste of what it's like to be a politician. Trail us around a little bit and spend some time in Wellington. So I just wanted to introduce EJ, Emma Grace, and Hini Atia, who I'm actually going to ask you to stand and give everyone a little wave. These young people, we choose them because we think they've got potential. We think they're the kind of people who can make a change in our future. And so I'm really proud that they've come along tonight and that around the country, we've got young people who do want to make the change so that people do make better choices. But now it's my chance to introduce one of my mates, Barbara Edmonds, who's probably well known to all of you. She fronts TV and she talks. She's got a long career in tax and finance, and she was various spokespersons. It's written down in front of me: revenue, economic development, internal affairs, and Pacific peoples. But she's actually just a really awesome person, and I'm sure you'll pick it up yourself when she speaks. She must know how to balance a budget. I know budgets in countries aren't like households, but when you've got 8 hungry kids, you've got to do something right. So look, Barb, great pleasure. Thanks for coming. Great pleasure. Really looking forward to hearing you speak.
Ina mana nui, ina tapu nui, no tā wahi, no te kāinga a tēnā koutou katoa, au te whaatalofa atu ma le whaalo ma lua le sui fua, maua malalangi e mama. Thank you, Duncan, for the warm welcome. Always good to be back in Christchurch, and thank you for being my taxi driver today. Also want to acknowledge our local Christchurch MPs and your local champions, the Honourable Dr. Megan Woods, Dr. Tracy McClellan, and the head boy for the class of 2023, Ruben Davidson. You guys must have the highest number of doctorates per capita per region, so I bow down to that. Also to my good friend Ginny Anderson, who's come from Wellington to support us today. To our youth MPs, all the best. July is when you head up to Wellington to represent your hood, represent your community. I know that you will do a fantastic job, and I look forward to supporting you from up home. Also, everybody, please a round of applause for Craig. Isn't he amazing? Craig, we are always smarter for your insights and your analysis. And also thank you to you all for being here. You are here because you care about our community, your community, and you also care for our country. So a lot has happened in Parliament over the last few weeks. If you haven't been watching Parliament TV, come and have a chat to your local MPs. A lot has happened. And that's had a profound impact on our families and our communities and our country. I'm here today to break down the choices that the government has made and give you a preview of the different choices that a Labour government would have made. Today I'm going to talk about 3 very simple things, but important ideas. First, and make no mistake about it, this will forever be remembered as the budget that cut women's pay. Not just any woman, the hardworking women who deliver our babies, the women who educate our young children, the women who care for us during our final days of our lives. So I'm going to start there. Next, I'm going to talk about some of the other choices that this government has made in their budget, which Craig has covered as well, and some other bits as well, but also what it means for you and our community. Because again, every decision a government makes isn't just a number on a page or a spreadsheet. It's actually a person, and it's about people, it's about families, and it's about communities. Lastly, what I want to talk to you about is what you didn't see in National's budget and the choices that Labour would have made instead. So let's get into it. Cutting women's pay to make the budget add up was a deliberate decision by Nicola Willis, no matter how many times she tells you it wasn't. The government changed the law under urgency, wiping 33 active pay equity claims off the books. And if you don't believe me, there are members in this room, there are people in this room who actually worked for years on those pay equity claims. And the government thought they'd get away with it. I've got to give David Seymour some credit though. He was the only one telling the truth when he said that their decision saved the budget. And as Craig showed you, over $12 billion they saved. For weeks they refused to tell us the full extent of the damage, but we saw in the budget the figures, and to be frank, it's shocking. In one move, they swept billions off the books, money that was set aside for future pay rises for low-paid women. They moved the goalpost for any future claims, leaving about 180,000 people, predominantly women, in service industries like plunket nurses, teacher aides, and hospice care workers to start again. They'll try and tell you that no one's pay has been cut. They'll say that women can still make claims. But when you take money that has been set aside for future pay rises and you put it into something else, that is a cut. Very plain and simple. For me, this is actually a little bit personal. My parents came to New Zealand from Samoa to give their children a better education. Before my mother died from cancer, she was an aged care sector worker at various rest homes across the Auckland region. I come from a family of aged care sector workers with 4 aunts who have or currently work in the sector. Despite how hard the job is, whether you have to hand feed someone, whether you have to shower them, whether you have to change them after they've had an accident, I'm really proud of my aunties and my mother for the work that they do in a very humble job and the long hours and the low pay. And the reaction from the public has been very swift because they understand what the government is really doing here. They're telling hard-working women that you don't matter. They're telling women you're not worth it. They're also telling women that your contribution to the economy is less than a man's is. I think one of the reasons this is resonating so strongly is because for many Kiwis, the promises they were sold at the last election have turned to dust. Are you back on track yet? As Craig asked. But actually, that's what Christopher Luxon said he was going to do. The question almost every Kiwi should continue to ask themselves that is, do I feel better off today than I did 18 months ago? As Craig showed, on almost every economic indicator, the national government has made things worse. They'll blame everyone else for it, or they'll take the credit for the work of the Reserve Bank. But the facts don't lie. While people all over New Zealand are struggling to pay the bills, National is giving massive handouts to landlords and tobacco companies. Kiwis were told the economy would be stronger. It's slower. Kiwis were told the cost of living would come down. But actually, you'll all know when you go to the supermarket, prices are just going up. Kiwis were also told that families with kids would get an extra $250 a fortnight to help with the cost of living. They actually said it was a $250 tax cut. Then later they said up to, and then later they said per fortnight. Yet most of that money is nowhere to be seen. Last year, I said during the budget that in the budget documents, those families were ghost families. And the government clearly didn't count on their own officials actually agreeing with me. National cannot confirm if even a single family has received the full $250 they were promised. Kiwis were told a government would get things moving, and yet building projects have ground to a halt. We have lost 15,000 jobs in the construction sector alone. This is particularly important point for you here in Canterbury, where the construction industry has played a major and crucial role in the recovery of your region and is a major employer here. They promised more connectivity, but they cancelled the ferries, which actually would have arrived next year. They promised you wouldn't be forgotten, but they appointed their most junior minister for the South Island, who doesn't even have a seat at the cabinet table. Time and time again, they have broken their promises. Now they've broken their promise for a better future for working women across all of New Zealand, Aotearoa. Something this government has failed to take into account is what happens when you give low-paid workers a pay rise. They spend it back in the economy, at our local shops, at our retailers, at our local restaurants. The decision to cut women's pay is not just bad for our economy, it's a direct assault on our values as New Zealanders. We're the first country in the world to give women the right to vote. Fighting for equality is in our national DNA, and turning our backs on equal pay is not who we are as Kiwis. So while there are other parts of this budget that I'll get into next, we must not forget that all of it comes at the expense of women. As Craig said, and as I've said time and time again, every budget is a choice. These choices are meant to reflect the underlying values of the government of the day. The reason why we have a budget is to allocate resources where they are needed so we can build the kind of communities and the society that are good for all people to live in. The budget is one of the best chances the government has to make clear to people why it is in power and what it wants to do. This is not just women's pay that National went after. They are also stealing from our kids' future by slashing the KiwiSaver contribution. An 18-year-old New Zealander, as of this year's budget, is now going to be $66,000 worse off in their retirement due to this cut. And Craig showed you what a median wage earner would also be. On cost of living support, the best most families will get is $7 a week. I am a mother of 8. I know how to budget a food budget. $7 is probably only going to buy you a 400-gram block of butter. They don't sell them, though, in 400 grams. Even before this budget, the government was failing to live up to their promises. Remember that $250 tax cut for those ghost families. And actually, many Kiwis actually voted for this government on that promise, but fewer than half of their target has actually received the full Family Boost payment. About a quarter of that Family Boost scheme has actually been eaten up by administration costs for IRD, rather than going to families to actually help them with childcare. Even Nicola Willis has admitted it's overly complicated. She's botched the numbers and the finances for her flagship cost of living program. It's quite simply a broken promise. National are also taking money away from families with a new baby at home by cutting back on the Best Start payment. Now, Best Start, families would get $73 a week. Now, $73 may not mean much to Nicola Willis or this government, but for many families, it is the difference between a box of nappies and a tin of formula. The budget also made changes to working for families, making over 60,000 families about $43 a fortnight worse off. So some families will get $7 a week, about 60,000 families are going to have $43 less a fortnight. It ended emergency housing contracts, meaning more Kiwis will be sleeping rough. And I don't know what it's like here in Christchurch, but in Wellington, where I live, you can see the growth in homelessness. If you've ever been to Auckland, you can see the growth in homelessness. They say there is no alternative, but that's not true. There is always a choice, and the National-led government are choosing wrong. Instead of helping families with the cost of living, they have wiped away, as Craig has talked about $500 million in taxes from multinational tech giants like Facebook and Google. I know what that legislation is because I was the minister in charge of putting that legislation in. So instead of creating jobs that pay well and help build a future here in New Zealand, they are pushing thousands of people out of work over to Australia and driving up the costs. Instead of making sure everyone can get the care they need when they need it, National's barely funding the health system enough to keep the lights on. And if you don't believe me, I'm pretty sure Craig showed you the numbers pretty well. Instead of investing in a future where everyone has a safe, warm, affordable home near schools, work and healthcare, they are gutting essential housing programs. Remember, they're not building any more social housing. Instead of bringing down power bills by investing in renewable energy, they've chosen to give $200 million subsidy to gas companies. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure our Honourable Dr. Megan Woods can tell you whether the Founder Gas, new gas place here in New Zealand in the last 20 years, I think it's an emphatic no. Now, I've heard some say that love it or hate it, there's at least us getting to a surplus in a few years from now. But that's only true because National moved the goalposts by making up their own measure for the surplus. Besides, what good is actually getting to a surplus when people are finding it harder and harder to pay the bills? When the construction sector has been decimated and Kiwis are fleeing for better prospects overseas, about a plane load a day. They call this the growth budget, but what growth are you talking about if you're measuring growing unemployment, growing homelessness, growing food prices, a growing gap between rich and poor, and the growing gap between men and women? If those are your metrics, then yes, this is a growth budget. All budgets are about choices, and we would have made different choices. Labor's focus will be on what matters most to people: well-paid jobs, safe and affordable homes, quality healthcare, and the peace of mind that comes from knowing you can pay the bills, you can care for your family, and you can plan for the future. We will choose to create good jobs, not just cut them. That means supporting local industries and small businesses. For example, I was here today in Christchurch looking at the studios as part of the University of Canterbury. That is what productivity and investment in a creative sector, which creates jobs, is. I was here with Tāwhaki a number of years ago. Through the advocacy of Megan and Tracy, we invested $7 million so that the growing aerospace industry here in Christchurch could have a landing strip that was only 40 minutes away rather than 4 hours away. We will choose to properly fund our public health system. If you've ever met Dr. Aisha Viral, who is our health spokesperson, I can tell you now she is the best advocate you'd ever want for a properly funded health system. We're not just going to fund it enough just to keep the lights on, but enough to make sure people can see a doctor when they need to. That our health system is properly staffed and not frozen on the front line. I've got a number of people that have come and spoken to me as the local MP in an area called Porirua. We have a wonderful polytechnic there, which is basically pumping out the most nurses for Māori and Pacific nurses in the country. The unfortunate thing, though, is last year's graduates, many of them have not been able to get a job because this government has done a funding freeze. These are our nurses. These are Kiwi nurses. And yet our government doesn't want to ensure that they have a job in the public health system. We will choose to build homes, not cut housing support to save $1 billion. Warm and affordable homes in communities where people can thrive and send their kids to a good public school down the street. These are the foundations of an economy with people at its heart and with an investment in our future. So every year, budgets are talked about in length in the media. I know I did 16 rounds of media in 24 hours, in our workplaces and around the dinner table and amongst friends. In every case, budgets should be judged on the difference they will make to people's lives. This will forever be remembered as the budget that cut women's pay. This is the budget that said women don't matter, that families can wait, that the future can be sold off. This is a budget that tells New Zealanders, you are better off going to Australia. Labor rejects those choices. We say that women deserve fair pay. We say that families doing it tough deserve support. We say that the next generation deserves hope. We say it's time to invest in jobs, health and homes. That's how we will build a better future, and we'll do it by making different choices. Whawhetai lava mole avanoa, and I think we are going to open up to questions and answers. Thank you very much, everyone.